Today I'm going to be making a butternut squash soup. Let's get started. So the base of this soup is going to be a butternut squash, onion, carrot, and I'm going to put an apple in as well. But if you only have onion and butternut squash, you can still make the soup. Some of the things are going to be extras. So to get us started, we need to start by chopping up our onion and carrot if you're using carrot. If you already know how to chop these and don't need the instructions, just zoom ahead a little bit. We're going to be getting the onion, carrot, and butternut squash in the pan. All right, so to chop my onion, now for this soup, because we're going to puree it at the end, we don't need a perfect dice on our onion, you just need to chop it. So kind of bigger pieces than you might dice. So I like to cut off the top and the bottom and then slice it in half, get the skin off, and then I rinse it under cold water after the skin's off to try to decrease some of those fumes. There's probably a different name for them that come off the onion to help me not cry as I do this. So skin off and then rinse these under cold water. If you have trouble crying when you cut onions. I feel like most people do. Some people might get used to it. All right, then onion side down, and just, again, this is a rough chop, so a couple times through. All right. And then the recipe calls for 1 large carrot. The carrots I have are from our CSA share, and they're a bit smaller, so I'm going to put in probably 3 carrots. And I'm just going to bring my compost bowl over to peel these. I find carrot peels go flying no matter what I do, so I try not to be too careful and just know I'm going to pick them up after either way. And again, the carrots can be a rough chop as well. All these veggies are from the Vermont Youth Conservation Corporation's Healthcare Share program. They are delicious and so fresh. Especially as we approach wintertime, it's great to get this fresh produce or have access to it. Okay, so rough chop on our carrots here. Cut the tops and bottoms off. And these don't have to be the same size because they're all going to simmer after and cook. And then we're going to puree it, so they're not going to, won't make a difference. This carrot has a little slit in it with some dirt. Ooh, it's flying around with some dirt in there. So I'm just going to carefully slice that off so I'm not getting any crunchy dirt in my soup. Okay, onions and carrots are ready. So I'm going to get my burner turned on here. And 1 tablespoon of olive oil or canola oil in your pan. Once that is hot and shimmery, we'll get the onions and carrots in. Give those about 5 to 7 minutes to start bringing out the flavors and softening up. And while we do that, we'll prep our garlic, apple, and butternut squash. Let me grab an apple. Okay. I think I need to do a little more research on cutting garlic. I'm kind of new to garlic. It's not been something that's agreed with me all that well. And so I don't use it a whole lot, but I feel like there's probably a better technique to get into this than I use. I've heard maybe that you can like squish it. Let's see. Well, that seemed to work pretty well. And then peel off all that outer skin. Likes to stick on there sometimes. Sometimes when you crush it, as I'll show you, it gives you, the skin kind of like comes off in one piece. All right, let's get these onions and carrots into the pot. All right, this piece of garlic is huge, so I'm just going to use one. If you love garlic, feel free to go up to 2 or 3. And I like to put my knife over here and just give it a smash. And that's where, if the skin hasn't been fully taken off, it'll kind of hold in one piece, and that's where you can get it off. And again, because we're pureeing this, it doesn't have to be perfectly minced. You can just kind of chop it up a bit. All right. I'm going to move my garlic over to the side so I can cut my butternut squash. Oftentimes, the most daunting thing about butternut squash is cutting it. And there's a few different ways you can go about this. So one, first give it a wash just to get any outside dirt or grime off there. And then you can peel it now or you can peel it after. I find it's easier to peel whole rather than working with little pieces. So I'm going to try to peel it whole. And I have 2 different peelers that I use. Sometimes this one's easier just the way you hold it, but this one tends to be a little sharper. It's newer. So see what you have in your house and test them out and see what works best. So let's just see. Well, this is not starting well. So that one's not feeling good in that direction. Let's try in this direction. Oh, better when I pull towards myself. This peeler is probably 10 years old, and I'm finding that it probably is just getting dull. I don't know if there's a way to sharpen these. You can probably just replace the blade. But peelers are also very inexpensive. So if you're using one that really isn't working the way you hope, consider upgrading. For less than $10, you can get a nice new peeler. All right, let's try this one too. So going away from myself, I don't know, it's feeling not great today. So I'm going to try going toward myself. That seems to work better. This is another one that the peeling is going to fly, kind of like the carrots. It's probably worth just embracing that and then cleaning it up later. Maybe if you have a garbage disposal, you do it over the sink. Do what works for you. But sometimes part of cooking is getting a little messy. We're almost there. Okay, I would consider this kind of the hardest part, and we're done. Give my onions and carrots a stir here. My heat on an induction burner is a little trickier to regulate than a stove, so yours is probably easier to know when you're on medium. Medium is a good temperature to start with here. Okay. All right, let's cut the top and the bottom off. I tend to kind of get my knife in here and just rock the squash. Same thing here. It just kind of work its way down there. Keep your hands out of the way. Look at that vibrant color. And then we know the seeds are all in this big part, so I tend to like to cut it here to give us like more manageable pieces to work with. All right, we've got a couple more peeling pieces right on the top here. The peel is not great when it's in your soup, so I would try to get as much of it off as you can. Okay. So now we can work. You could cut this in half. You can work as it is. The sharpness of your knife is going to make a difference here. I didn't like how tippy that was, so I'm going to break it up even more, give myself a little more stability. I like to put my hand on the top of the knife when I'm pushing down into a squash. It just gives me more pressure to work with. It's also keeping my fingers out of the way. Okay, so then from there, again, we just need this cube. So it doesn't have to be perfect, about 1-inch cubes. And once those are done, You can get those and your garlic in the pan. Squash does have like a stickiness to it where sometimes you'll go to pick up your knife and it'll be stuck there. So just be careful as you're kind of moving your hands around your knife to take pieces off. This was a quite large squash, so I actually think I'm only going to need half of it in here. But I will show you how to cut the other piece. Okay, we've got our garlic, our onion, our carrot, and our squash in the pot here. I'm going to get the apple in. The apple is an option, or optional. You don't have to use it, but it will add kind of a nice brightness to the dish if you want to give that a try. And so I'm going to put half the apple in. And I am going to peel it, mostly just for texture. The peel probably would blend in, but for texture and also color. I want the soup to stay nice and kind of bright orange. All right. The last thing that I'm going to put in here before I get the broth in is I'm going to add some ginger. This is, again, optional, but if you like ginger, ginger works really nicely in a butternut squash soup. So about an inch chunk of fresh ginger. If you like ginger but you don't have fresh, you could use powdered ginger. You probably do about maybe start with a half a teaspoon and see how that tastes for you. Just getting that thin skin off here. And then to cut fresh ginger, I like to go into rounds. Careful of your fingers. And then I smash these with the end of my knife. You need to be careful. Use the heel of your hand. Make sure you're not hitting the sharp part of your knife, but it works pretty well. It really breaks up those fibers. And then it allows me to just chop through the ginger. You do want to chop this a bit. Even if you have a really good blender, it's going to chop it up, but sometimes ginger can be a little fibrous, and we wouldn't want a big chunk of fibery ginger in there. Okay. This is starting to smell and look really yummy. All right, now we need 4 cups of broth. I often use a bouillon paste where I just take a teaspoon, mix it with a cup of water, and I have broth. But this box of chicken stock was on sale at the grocery store, and I thought, well, I need 4 cups. I can use the whole thing. I'm not going to have any waste, and that sounds really easy. So decided to go that route. You can also use a lower sodium broth. That can be a nice option. This broth does get pretty salty. I'm not going to add any extra salt to the soup because of how salty the broth is. So I would cover your veggies. Depending on the size of your squash is going to impact how much volume you have here. If you have too much broth, it's going to be a thinner soup. So I've just kind of covered it. I have a little stock left in there. Once it's done cooking, I'll see if I need more. I can always add it at the end. Now, if you're adding any spices, this would be the place to add them in. So curry powder, a dash of nutmeg, some paprika, some ginger or turmeric can be really good. And I'll put these volumes in the description for the video. You can add those now. If you're unsure, I would make the soup as is, puree it, and then take little amounts out and add a little bit of the spices just to taste and see how it tastes for you. And then you can kind of adjust it and add more based on your taste. We can't take it out, but we can always add it in later. All right, so we're going to bring this to a simmer. We're going to let it simmer for about 20 to 25 minutes till everything's nice and tender, and then we'll get it pureed. So I'll be back. So as the soup is coming to a simmer, I did want to show you how to cut the rest of the squash. And so the inside of this is going to be seeds. You have some options. You could cut down the center and scoop out the seeds and cut it that way. I've also sometimes taken my knife and kind of cut around the seeds and the seeds just stay in the middle. You can cut it that way. But let's go with a kind of the standard method of cutting down the center here. And we'll scoop these seeds out. If you wanted to save the seeds and roast them to go on top of your soup, that could probably be quite good. Depends what you're interested, how much cooking you're interested in doing, what you have time for. Today, I'm not going to. They're going right in the compost. Okay. The nice thing about this is now we can work flat side down on these squash. And if you don't need, if you're not putting all of your squash in the soup, I would dice it up into cubes that you could then roast. It would be delicious roasted along with something. You could always just steam or boil it and then puree it. Keep some pureed squash in the freezer if you need it later. But the more we can do that prep now, probably the more likely we are to use up the item. If you don't have a knife that you feel comfortable with, or it's just kind of not feeling comfortable for you to do this chopping at this point, you can put this whole squash in the microwave. I would try to stab it with a fork a couple times. 3 to 4 minutes, flip it over, 3 to 4 minutes, probably another 3 to 4 minutes. It might take 8 to 10 minutes. But then it'll be pureed, and then from there, you can get the skin off and get the seeds out. And you could put just the pureed squash in here too. It's not going to need the 20 to 25 minutes. I'd probably kind of simmer the other stuff and then add that in toward the end. But that's another option if this just feels like it's not a good option for you right now. All right, so there is the rest of our squash cut up. And this has another probably 15 to 18 minutes here. And then we'll be back. All right, our butternut squash ingredients have been simmering here for about 25 minutes. Everything is nice and tender, and the broth is still in there and covering it, but it has cooked down a little bit. It kind of evaporated as it cooked. And again, I have a little bit of broth left I might add as needed. But now we're at the point where we get to puree. So you can use a standing blender and just scoop it into the blender and puree. Make sure you don't seal the blender completely because this is quite hot. So use that top in the blender that comes out and just put a dish towel if you need to cover it. I'm going to use an immersion blender today. This is a handy tool that I use quite often in my kitchen. I find it really easy to clean, which I appreciate. So the thing with the immersion blender, when you use it, just make sure this bottom is covered in liquid before you press on, otherwise it can get splashy. So I'm just going to put this in here and kind of pulse and get this pureed up. You'll hear me kind of turning it off and on. It's because I'm picking it up and kind of going back down if I see a chunk. All right. So about 2 minutes or so there. Put that in. Okay, so at this point, we get to see where we're at. I'm gonna take a little bit of soup out. Now, I haven't added any extra spices here, or I also haven't added any creamy element. And I would kind of like to taste it. Ooh, careful, your pan is hot. And then also see what it tastes like with the different spices. And then again, once you get used to a recipe like this, you get to know what you like. Adding the spices in earlier would help them kind of increase that flavor as well. But the 2 spices recommended in some of the recipes were curry powder and nutmeg. And so I've just taken a little bit in both bowls, and I'm gonna add a dash. I'm gonna taste it on its own, then add a dash of each and just see what I like. Mmm. Oh, yum. It's really good just as is. I'm tasting the apple coming through, which I like. I'm glad I put a half an apple rather than the whole one because I don't just want it to taste like apple soup. It is really good on its own. All right. So a little bit of curry powder in here. Nutmeg is a strong spice, and so it can be easy to overdo it. I'm wanting just a little bit, and I'm afraid if I shake it in there, I might get too much. Okay, so I'm just going to mix this in here. And then, ooh, I can already smell the nutmeg. Mix the curry powder in. Already smells like Indian food. It's yummy. Again, I haven't really tested my ratios here. It is definitely giving a more savory soup vibe. So if you like butternut squash soup that is not sweetened or not tasting like a kind of creamier dessert, curry root might be a really nice option, especially if you like Indian food or that curried flavor. You might really enjoy that. Let's see what the nutmeg is like. The nutmeg is nice. Again, nutmeg is strong. I encourage you to smell nutmeg first and see what you think. Some people would say, whoa, either I don't like that or it's too strong. So a little bit of nutmeg would go a long way. I would say like 1/8 of a teaspoon in your whole thing of soup would be plenty. Okay. I'm actually going to leave my soup as is right now without any additional spice. I really like the taste of it, and I'm also going to add a creamy element. And then this gives people in my household kind of an option to, doctor it up if they want a little more flavor on their own, but keeps it a little more simple. Okay, I'm going to add, so a 1/2 cup of either coconut milk or cream or milk could be added if you want this a little bit creamier. I have some cubes of coconut milk that I had frozen after the last time I used it. This is about a 1/2 cup. So I'm gonna add these in to just add a creamy element to the soup. Again, not a necessary thing, just an optional one here, but it will add a nice creaminess. If you taste your soup and think, it's really good, but it needs something, or maybe it's not really good yet, I'm still looking for something else, the elements that might help, sometimes a little bit of added sweetness. So a teaspoon of sugar, a teaspoon of maple syrup might be really good in here. You don't need a lot, a little will go a long ways, but it'll really balance the flavor. Sometimes a little acidic brightness. So a little squeeze of lemon or lime can really bring out that flavor a little bit more or balance the flavors. And then you might just need a little salt and pepper if you feel like it's just needing a little something extra. So try those and see where you're at, see what you might enjoy. This is like velvety. Give you a nice view there. Not the best angle, sorry. But it does look delicious. I love to serve butternut squash soup with like a dollop of plain Greek yogurt or a dollop of a light sour cream on top. I just find that creaminess is nice. And then maybe you serve it with half a sandwich From a balanced meal perspective, again, this is all veggies. We're not having, we don't have a protein source in here. And so balancing it out with, yeah, half a sandwich or something else to go along with it can make a nice way to round out the meal. All right, and that's our butternut squash soup. I hope you give it a try. I hope you kind of get creative in playing around with different spices and see what you enjoy. And thank you to VYCC for these delicious vegetables.